اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So today we will have our third session from the Fiqh Shafi'i course. Today, inshallah, we will conclude the chapter of Tahara, of purity. I'll point out, inshallah, I'll summarize and point out some of the really important points that you should all be aware of and know well. And I'll take some questions at the end if people want to ask anything regarding purity specifically. Because it's a very large, it's one of the bigger chapters within the books of fiqh, definitely. And there's a lot of commentary on it. Where's the clicker? There should be a clicker somewhere. Right there. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. So, I'm going to go back a little bit, just maybe one or two slides, just to clarify a few things in case they weren't clear for those who attended last week. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه وصاحب الجبائر يمسح عليها ويتيمم ويصلي ولا إعادة عليه إن كان وضعها على طهر. So, صاحب الجبائر means the person who has a cast on. يمسح عليها regarding wudu. So if you're making wudu and it's on a piece of your body that needs to have water on it during wudu, because you don't need water on your belly during wudu, obviously. So if you have a cast there, it doesn't matter. But if you have it on a piece of your body that should have water on it, then you wipe on the jabira, you wipe on the cast. ويتيمم, and if you're not going to do it that way, there's no water, so you can do tayammum, then it doesn't really matter. You do the same, because tayammum, you just hit the ground once with your hands, and then then you just wipe your face and wipe your arm. So if the jabira is on your arm, then you wipe on it as well. If it's not, then it doesn't matter either. إن كان وضعها على طهر ولا إعادة عليه. And for the musannif, the person who put this, يعني rahmatullah al-ali Abu Shuja', who actually wrote this matan, and this is for the majority of the Shafi'is, that if you wore it with tahara, meaning you had wudu before putting it on, then you don't have to repeat any of your prayers. But if you didn't, for the majority of the Shafi'iyya, then you have to repeat your prayers. However, Imam Nawawi actually differs and says having wudu before covering the wound is not required. So, and again, I'll point out whenever the Shafi'iyya have an opinion that's a little bit on the outside, meaning they ما تفردوا به, as they say, meaning stuff that the Shafi'iyya believe that the rest of the schools of jurisprudence don't necessarily agree with, and who within the Shafi'i madhab doesn't agree with that, so that you can kind of access that opinion if it makes more sense to you. So that's what the Imam Nawawi said here, that it doesn't have to be on tuhr. It doesn't matter how many times you do this. If the cast is on for 6 or 7 weeks, it doesn't make a difference. But you have to make a wudu for every time. So when you have a cast on, you have to make wudu for every prayer. Just like you have to do tayammum for every prayer. So you can't do masah on the cast and say, well, I hold my wudu. No, you have to make wudu again, because it's not a full wudu that you're doing here. I just want to clarify those points because we didn't talk about them last week in depth. وكل مائع خرج من السبيلين نجس إلا المني وغسل جميع الأبوال والأرواث واجب إلا بول الصبي الذي لم يأكل الطعام فإنه يطهر برش الماء عليه. And by the way, in terms of reciting the matan, stick to the book, the Ultimate Conspectus, the actual book that I asked you to buy or to purchase, because the tashkeel on it is correct. Jazakallah khair, the brother who put these together, not all of the tashkeel here is correct. Not all of the harakat are correct here. Just so that when you attempt to recite it, that you don't refer to the wrong text and then recite it wrong because it's written wrong. So always refer to the actual book that Musa Ferber put together, because he has the tashkeel all correct. So here it says that this is talking about najasat, certain types of filth, or ritual filth. Anything that exits the genitals from both front or behind, najis is filth except for sperm. That is not. It is not najis. Everything else you need to clean, you need to cleanse yourself from. Meaning if it's on your underwear or if it's on your body, you have to cleanse yourself from it. And mani isn't. It's not something that you need to necessarily remove. وغسل جميع الأبوال والأرواث واجب, and basically washing off all urine and feces that are on your body or on your clothing is a wajib, regardless of whether you're going to pray or not. Like, it's not something that's only for salah or for, no. If you have feces or urine on you, your priority at that moment is to remove the ritual filth from you, regardless of whether this is for salah or for any other reason. That doesn't necessarily need a reasoning for it. إلا بول الصبي الذي لم يأكل الطعام فإنه يطهر برش الماء عليه. Except the urine of an infant male boy that has not eaten or drink anything besides his mother's milk. As for females, because when they're born, there is discharge that comes from both that is urine and from the other exits, and it's kind of it's mixed together, so they can't really differ between them. So you should wash it off. But for a boy, because it's either poop or urine, then it's a bit clearer. So if the child has only drank his mother's milk, then you don't need to do much besides just remove it with a little bit of water. All right. Now, وَلَا يُعْفَى. Now, this is important here. This is where we're going to start from. We did these last week, but I'm going to start from this slide, inshallah, for this week. وَلَا يُعْفَى عَنْ شَيْءٍ مِّنَ النَّجَاسَاتِ إِلَّا الْيَسِيرَ مِنَ الدَّمِ وَالْقَيْحِ وَمَا لَا نَفْسَ لَهُ سَائِلَةٌ إِذَا وَقَعَ فِي الْإِنَاءِ وَمَاتَ فِيهِ فَإِنَّهُ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ. So وَلَا يُعْفَى means, and nothing is excusable from the najasat, from ritual filth, except الْيَسِيرَ مِنَ الدَّمِ وَالْقَيْحِ, except small amounts of blood and pus. Now, one of the assignments so the second assignment for this chapter, there's only 2 assignments for this first chapter. There's 6 chapters in total for this semester. This chapter is probably one of the longest ones. The second assignment is that I put a document, a Google document. It's a Word document. On it are 51 exceptions that the Shafi'iyya have that are excusable for small amounts of filth, of ritual filth. So Abu Shuja' al-Asfahani rahimahullah, he pointed out 2 things. Al-yasira min ad-dami wal-qayh, very small amounts of blood and pus, and I'll explain to you what small means in a moment. وَمَا لَا نَفْسَ لَهُ سَائِلَةٌ, and living things that do not possess flowing blood. So you're talking about flies and insects in general. Most insects and very, very small creatures that just don't have flowing blood in them. So if you squish it, it doesn't start to bleed, and you have to go wipe up the blood. Mosquitoes are added to this, because the blood that comes out of a mosquito is not its own. It's probably yours or someone else in the household. So it doesn't have flowing blood within it. إذا وقع في الإناء, if these creatures fall into a container and die, therein they do not render it filthy or najas. Right? So on the other hand, if a dog or a cat or another animal was to die somewhere or die inside of a container, then it makes it najas. But if a mosquito falls into your cup of tea or you can just remove it and continue to eat. It doesn't make it najis. All right. So these are the 2 exceptions that Imam Abu Shuja' rahimahullah put together. The Shafi'iyya in general have over 50. So I put a document that has 51 of them. So the assignment, for those who want to be credit students, just to go to the document and translate 1 or 2 if the one that you chose is really, really short. Some of them are just like 3 words. Translate them into what they are in English. So you have to do some research to kind of figure out what the wordings are, and then research the actual exception and see if there's any commentary from other scholars on why this exception applies or why it doesn't apply. It shouldn't take you more than 10-15 minutes of work, but it's just nice to kind of, I do want you to look up Arabic words and kind of, again, most of Islamic knowledge is written in this language, so it's important for you to try and increase your proficiency to whatever degree that you can, inshallah, as we go along. So just choose one of the exceptions, there's like 50 of them, and then just put it on the Google Google document, and write your name at the end, just that you did it, so I know that it's you, inshallah, and it goes forward for your credit, inshallah. But these are the 2 that we need to know. So what is small amounts? What is small amounts? Is a liter a small amount? Is a cup a small amount? So it's whatever you can't see with the naked eye in terms of urine, and it's less than maybe the last digit of your finger in terms of blood. And that's how the Malikiyya specifically define it. The Shafi'iyya aren't very far off in terms of that definition. So small amounts of blood and pus are fine, meaning less than the tip of your finger. And then talking about the insects that don't have flowing blood falling into food or falling into anything that may be otherwise contaminated if it was something bigger, right? And in general, this is important because when you go to the bathroom, this is the question that comes up a lot. So if you go to the bathroom and then after you're done, you walk away, what if you drip, like a drip of bowl or of urine into your underwear? What do you do at that point? And that's why it's so important that when we go to the bathroom, we actually take time to purify. That's why men shouldn't do it standing up. And if you do, then you should have like a system of how you're going to actually make sure that you're not continuously dripping for 10-15 minutes afterwards. That's why you should be doing it sitting down and giving yourself enough time so that you empty your bladder to the best of your ability. Maybe if you get older, it becomes a bit more difficult. So the way to do it actually is to put a napkin or a tissue, and then before you pray, remove it if there's anything that is on it. If it's obviously large amounts, meaning if you're still dripping within something that is clearly visible, then you remove the napkin and then you make wudu again. But if it's small, meaning and it's something that's not visible, you can't really necessarily see what's there, then the Shafi'i are okay with that. They're okay with it. So sometimes people aren't sure, like what is it? Is it water because I washed the area? Is it water that's on the napkin or in my underwear, or is it actual bowl? So you're not actually required to go and sniff it out and see what it is, and that's not what you're supposed to do here. Honestly, as long as you put in the effort to cleanse yourself, give yourself enough time to make sure that you're not going to continue to drip urine, and you don't see any urine, there's no visible urine, then you're fine to keep on going with your prayer. But you have to be mindful of this. This is something that you want to be mindful of, because the Prophet ﷺ talked a lot about those who do not take time to purify themselves from urine. This is something that is talked about quite a bit in the Prophet ﷺ hadith, and he points out that this is one of the reasons for adab al-qabr and for other types of punishment. And it's not just because the person, as people, as Muslims, we should be putting effort to cleanse ourselves and to be ritually pure before we actually perform our prayers in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the important part. Here the Shafi'iyya excuse any najasa that is not visible, that you cannot see. If you can't see it, because if I got one of those top-notch detectors that kind of detect specific chemicals within urine, like some acid that's always there, then basically if we turn it on and turn off the lights, everyone would have a little certain amount of a certain degree of it. It's just how life is. That is not. There's a word in fiqh that is important. ما لا يمكن الاحتراز عنه. That which is unavoidable. That is what is unavoidable in Islam. You're not held accountable for. You're purifying yourself within reason, right? You're purifying yourself within reason, within what is reasonable, what you can purify yourself from. There are certain filths in the world that come out of you and you're surrounded by that are unavoidable, right? That's why this document, once we translate it, is helpful to go through to see what they have said is excusable in terms of small amounts of filth, just for your own comfort and for you to understand, inshallah, how it works. And the Shafi'i are very similar to the rest of the madhahib. And if you go and once we study, inshallah, more schools of jurisprudence, primary texts, you'll find that they all kind of define it a little bit differently. Some of them give it's as big as a coin, some of them are smaller than a coin. They have different ways of trying to define what is considered small, excusable amounts of filth and what is not. But it's all within reason, it's all whatever seems reasonable. So you try to be reasonable. I do get a lot of people come to me with questions. This is probably the number one issue that comes to me from individuals who have maybe a little bit of OCD. And this becomes a big problem for them because they spend hours upon hours in the bathroom trying to purify from every last drop. And try to explain, no, it's not. You shouldn't do that. Like you spend a reasonable amount of time, like maybe 5 minutes. You're in the bathroom. You make sure you empty yourself. You clean the area. You can put a napkin. You get up and go. Before you pray, take it out, throw it out. Unless it's covered with urine or blood, then you should be okay to continue to move forward with your prayer. But subhanAllah, it's sometimes a little bit of a struggle. But that's for this, and that's important. Again, this is one of the chapters on Tahara that we could go for like 3 or 4 lessons on, going through the details of what it looks like. But you're welcome to ask questions, inshallah, at the end of today's lecture regarding anything surrounding this. I don't think I need you to know, besides the hadith, إذا وقع الذباب في إناء أحدكم فليغمسه كله ثم ليطرح. So if a fly fell into the hadith, where the fly falls into like your container, then you can just throw it out. You don't have to get rid of the container and what's inside of it, and that's why we know. والحيوان كله طاهر إلا الكلب والخنزير وما تولد منهما أو من أحدهما والميتة كلها نجسة إلا السمك والجراد والآدمي. There's a lot of mistakes in tashkil here, so don't use this one for recitation in Arabic. Use the actual matan from Musa Ferber's book. So, and all animals are pure, except dogs and pigs. And this is the Shafi'i and the Hanbali way. There's a slide where I'm just going to explain it so that I don't get 5,000 questions on the issue. But this is how the Shafi'iyya see it. This is how they've always seen it. وَمَا تَوَلَّدَ مِنْ أَحَدِهِمَا مِنْهُمَا أَوْ مِنْ أَحَدِهِمَا, and everything, the offspring of both of them or any of them. Meaning anything that is bred as a half-breed from a dog or a half-breed from a pig is also najis for the Shafi'iyya, meaning everything about them is. وَالْمَيْتَةُ كُلُّهَا نَجِسًا, and everything that died that was not properly slaughtered is najis. إِلَّا السَّمَكْ وَالْجَرَادْ وَالْآدَمِي, except 3 things. So fish, locusts, grasshoppers, and human beings. So fish, what they mean by that is not just fish. Everything that is in the sea, every living creature that's in this, every sea creature that dies is not najis, right? So they use the word fish and that's just the Arabic word for everything living in the sea. So like whales are also not najis when they die in the sea, even though they are mammals and they're not necessarily fish, quote unquote, if you want to get more kind of specific and technical with the terminology. And it's not, when they wrote this, they weren't looking into these kind of differentiations. Everything that's in the sea, samak is tahir, and other marine life that live purely in water. So not amphibians, nothing that lives on both water and the land, they don't count. And locusts and grasshoppers is insects. So in general, insects, small insects, not the big ones, not the big, not tarantulas that are, I'm talking about small insects that are unavoidable or part of the regular surroundings. And then, yeah, even large spiders can also be occur. But again, anything that when you squish it or you smash it, it actually, there's a flowing blood or there's flowing substance is najis. If it's not, there's nothing flowing out of it, then that's tahir. So it continues to be pure. And then the third is the human being. So when the human being dies, and we talked about this before, they are not najis when they pass away. Or at least most of them aren't. But no, they are. No, they're not. None of them are. All right. Dogs. ويغسل من ولوغ الكلب والخنزير 7 مرات. ويغسل الإناء من ولوغ الكلب والخنزير 7 مرات إحداهن بتراب ويغسل من سائر النجاسات مرة تأتي عليه والثلاث أفضل. So, and containers in which dogs or pigs lapped in, meaning they either licked or drank from, either, right? We are washed 7 times. One of those washings must include soil from the earth. And other types of filth are washed once, but doing them 3 times is sunnah, as doing 3 things 3 times is sunnah in general. But everything else that is najis that comes upon a container or a clothing or whatever, or fabrics of any sort, then you wash it once, 3 times as sunnah. But if it's a dog or a pig, then the Shafi'iyya, 7 times one of them has to be with soil. There's a lot of difference of opinion regarding this one hukum, a lot. So let's break it down. So trained or owned dogs and pigs, trained or owned. We're not talking about stray. Stray is different. Stray is, most scholars kind of agree to their impurity. But let's talk about trained dogs and pigs, meaning pigs as in pets and trained dogs as in pets as well, or pigs that live in a barn or a farm. So the Hanafis say the dogs, and this is one of the few times where I'll break down all 4 schools just so that you have information, because this seems to be an issue that comes up all the time, so just for your own understanding. So the Hanafis say that dogs and pigs are pure in essence, al-ayn, tahir al-ayn, meaning their bodies, they're pure, but their saliva is impure. So the saliva of the dog for the Hanafis is impure. The Malikis say that dogs and pigs are pure in essence and their saliva is pure, both. So the Malikis don't see impurity in dogs at all. And then the Shafi'i and the Hanbali, which is what we're saying the Shafi'i, is that dogs and pigs are impure in essence and their saliva is impure too. So you can see there's a little bit of a lot of kind of discrepancy here in terms of how the madhahib view this issue here when talking about dogs and pigs. Now, actually taking time to talk about the reasoning behind it would be a stretch for the purpose of this course, honestly, and I don't think it's fair to do that. But you can access it. It's on. I will post to the classroom an explanation of of a brother who talks about why the Malikiyya understand it that way. So you can go and you can listen to it. But basically, I'll make it very simple for you to understand. The Malikis that don't see this to be impure, they go by the fact that every living thing is pure by nature. And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ gave that hadith that I quoted, that I showed you a second ago, where you wash 7 times, one with the soil of the earth, they say, well, what is more impure? Is it the skin of a dog or actual feces, like the feces of a human being? Which is more impure? So the Malikis say it's the feces of the human being by far. And if that comes upon you, you only wash once. So why are we doing it 7 times for a dog? So they say that's a ritual. That's an issue of ta'abbud. It's an issue of doing an act of worship, coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a sunnah. It's something, but it's a sunnah meaning that it's not actually impure. It's a sunnah to do it. That's how they understand this hadith and this. So they don't refuse the hadith. They understand differently. This action is not a practical command. It's not a command of this is how you actually wash off their filth. This is the act of worship that you should do when it occurs. And it's an act of ta'abbud, meaning you get hasanat for it. And if you don't do it, you're not punished. But the actual body is still in essence pure. So that's our understanding of it. And then the Shafi'i and the Hanbali, based on that hadith, say no, it must be very impure because it's asking for 7 times. But it's a different way of understanding text or a different way of understanding evidence and interpreting evidence. So Hanafis allow selling dogs and pigs, the rest don't. So the Hanafis allow actually selling and buying dogs and pigs for whatever use they're going to be used for, and the rest of the madhab actually do not permit that. Owning dogs must be for either hunting or protection. There's really no other reasons for the majority of scholars and the majority of schools of jurisprudence in terms of owning dogs. It's either for hunting or protection for the majority of schools of jurisprudence. And the dogs must live outside, not inside the house. It is permissible to own dogs. It is impermissible to own dogs as pets. This is for the majority of schools of jurisprudence, and the Shafi'is amongst them. This is how they see it. Meaning, if you're going to own a dog, either you're hunting or you're using for personal protection or protection of your house, and they should live outside in a dog house. They shouldn't live inside your home, because they don't believe that the dog is pure. The dog's skin and saliva is impure for the Shafi'is and Hanbali specifically. So having them inside the house is a musibah, because everything they touch is going to turn, you have to walk around washing everything. So you have to keep them outside. But if they're trained and they're outside, then that is permissible for the Shafi'i, Hanbali, and the Hanafis. They're all okay with that. So you say, what about a pet? Well, having a pet is different. For the Maliki specifically, dogs are pure. And it's only unrecommended to own dogs as pets in the house. For the Malikis, it's only an unrecommended issue. It's not haram. So it's something that's makruh to have a dog as a pet inside the house. And the reasoning behind it, at least this is what Ibn Abdul Barr says in the Tamheed. And I know, again, I'm not trying to turn this whole thing into a comparative fiqh lesson, but this is something I want you to have clarity on, so when you get asked the question, you know how to explain it. What he says, rahmatullah alayh, is that the reasoning is bad odor and causing people fear. Meaning, the reason that you shouldn't have a dog inside your house is because of the bad odor that you'll have inside of your house, which the malaika won't want to come in. People won't want to I won't visit you if you have a dog in your house, as simple as that. Like, not that you care, but I'm saying a lot of people won't do it. And then it can cause people fear, walking around with a dog, having a dog inside of your house, barking at people every time they walk around across the door. I mean, these are the reasonings behind it. Outside of those two reasonings, Ibn Abdul Barr said he doesn't see a reason for someone not to be able to have a trained dog, but here I said trained, right? So what is the dabit of trained? Meaning a dog that will not eat its own feces or other things' feces. Like, it's trained to only eat from the bowl that you put food in. It's not going to go poop and then eat its own poop. And it's not going to poop inside the house. Again, it's disgusting, but that's how these animals function. And really, dogs and pigs both have that same functionality where they will eat waste. They'll eat waste, biological waste that comes from living things, which is why these ahkam exist around them. What do I agree with, or what do I think is? I go with the Hanafis on this one. Not to anyone to celebrate if they like the Hanafis. I just think for this one specifically, I think they got it right. I think when it comes to the saliva of dogs, I think there's najis, and I think when it comes to the actual skin, that it isn't. So if you're walking and a dog brushes up on you, or you pet a dog, you don't have to really do anything at all. But if their saliva is going to be slobbered on you, you should wash it off. And the Hanafis don't wash off 7 times once with the turab either. They just wash off normally. And they also agree with the Malikis in terms of the hadith of 7 times is an issue of ritual. So if you have the time and the capacity, it's a sunnah, you get ajr from doing it. And if you don't, then you're fine doing it just once, and that is more than enough. It's very rare for someone to be teaching a Shafi'i matn and then say that he agrees with another madhab regarding something, but I think what I really want you to walk away from at the end of this course, and hopefully the courses to come in fiqh specifically, is an appropriate appreciation for the schools of jurisprudence that exist within the Islamic law. The amount of time and effort and thought that went into putting together all these rulings, and how they interpreted evidence, and how they appreciate the interpretation of evidence on its own, and the fact that they took time to actually look and have logic and rationale behind everything they talked about. Me teaching this does not mean that you have to become Shafi'i from now on. It doesn't mean that what they're saying is the only correct thing. Also, it doesn't mean that I'm pointing out all their mistakes and that they're incorrect and everything I'm saying is. No. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm showing you the collective intellectual output of a large group of Islamic scholars over the last 1,000 years. Their school of thought, and this is what they came up with. So if you follow these rulings, just sticking to that one, then you are basically safe. Because you can always say, this is 100,000 scholars talked about this, and this is what they looked at, so I'm not going to be able to know more than them. If you do the Malikis, it's the same thing. Hanafi is the same thing. Hanbali is the same thing. They're all groups that have hundreds of thousands of scholars who have supported this way of thought for a very, very long time. And then if you do something different, that's okay as well, as long as you understand the reasoning and the evidence behind it, and the evidence makes sense to you, and this is what you're going to, it's based on ilm, not just based on just looking for a way out every time you're given an answer that you don't like. So this is what we have to really, this is what I want you to learn from all of this. And at the end of the day, you can, once we're done this course, you'll be able to say, you know what, I know how to hold on to my tahara, purity, pray, fast, give zakah, and do hajj on the Shafi'i madhab. Like, I know how to do that, so if you're ever uncertain, just go back to what the scholars talked about. Like, you can always just recline upon, yep, if I do this, then I'm safe, because this is what they explained in this long madhab. And then, if you learn another one, and another one, and another one, you are just basically expanding your horizon, you're learning more, and you get to make some choices between the different opinions and the methodology, and the interpretation of evidence that they had leading to a specific ruling. And this is what I'm going to test you on at the end of this. If you don't understand that, I will fail you. If you end up walking away from this course with anything else, with any other understanding in general of how Islamic jurisprudence works, then I will make sure you don't fast and we have to do it again. Until at least the clarity of the essence of what we're trying to learn here. It's not enough for me that you understand what the arkan al-wudu is. It's important to me to understand why we're studying it based on a madhab. Why don't I just take all of the madhab and just make up my own? Because if I make my own, that means it's my own madhab. You actually want to listen to what I think, not 100,000 people before? That doesn't make any sense. I'm just one person. This is what I think. You shouldn't be subjected to just one person's thought. I will break down things for you and show you different pieces of evidence, especially regarding issues that are very relevant to us, which is fine. And you can make your choice at the end. I personally follow the Hanafi madhab when it comes to dogs. So I don't think it's permissible to have a pet inside the house. But I think it's okay to have it outside. If I brush up to a body, I'm not going to make wudu again, or not going to wash it off. And but a Shafi'i, if the Shafi'i and Hanbali opinion makes sense to you, then even the dog touching the back of a dog, you're going to go and wash off appropriately. And I'll take questions at the end. But I hope this was, and these are on the slides, so you can always access them on the slides if you want to keep them as notes, inshallah, for you moving forward. وإذا تخللت الخمرة بنفسها طهرت وإن تخللت بطرح شيء فيها لم تطهر. And if and this is called istihala, to make something halal. So if wine becomes pure when so wine becomes pure when it turns into vinegar. Now I don't want to go. I'm not a biochemist, and maybe chemists may understand how this works, but that's not the point of this lesson. So we don't want to walk down that route. But wine can turn into vinegar, and they're not that far away from each other biochemically. They're quite close. So if wine on its own turns into vinegar, then it's tahir. Now it turns, because khamr on its own is najis. It's impure, and it shouldn't be bought or sold or done anything with it. It shouldn't be processed. But if it turns into into wine on its own, into vinegar on its own, then that's fine. If it turns into vinegar by processing, any form of processing, adding something to it, taking something from it, whatever you're doing to it, then it's not pure. It doesn't purify. That's for the Shafi'iyya. Now the Hanafis and Malikis disagree with this. So you have like right in the middle in terms of the schools of jurisprudence, that no, if you process wine and turn it into vinegar, then it's pure. But Shafi'is specifically, and then the Hanbalis as well, no, if you process it, then it doesn't make a difference. You just get rid of the wine, you get rid of the khamr. But if it turns into vinegar on its own, then that's fine. Then you can use that vinegar, it's pure and it's fine. But if you try to process it to turn it into vinegar, then no. Does that make sense? That's how the Shafi'is look at it. Unless you own a winery or you're getting into this shouldn't be that important to you. Most of us just buy vinegar from Ala ad-Din or something, and we're more than happy with that. وَيَخْرُجُ مِنَ الْفَرْجِ ثَلَاثَةُ دِمَاء. And there are 3 types of blood that exit from the female private part. And we have to go through these today. So damul hayd wal nifas wal istihada. So there are 3 things. There is the menstrual blood, which is damul hayd, right? And then there's postnatal, after giving birth, which is nifas. And then there's irregular, which is istihada. Meaning it's neither menstrual nor is it postnatal. فالحيض هو الدم الخارج من فرج المرأة على سبيل الصحة من غير سبب الولادة ولونه أسود محتدم اللذاع. So menstrual blood is blood that normally exits from a woman's private part without being caused by delivery. It is black in color and hot and pungent. And this is how they describe it في الفقه. And that's a description that's important for the sisters once they have irregular periods. Because this is probably, if I rank the questions I get, this is probably number 5. In the number of I get this question almost once, twice, 3 times a month easily. And what do I do if my period is over and then 3 or 4 days later I'm seeing blood? Well, we have to talk about what color is it. If it's not very dark, it doesn't look like menstrual blood, then it doesn't count, right? If it's only been 3 days of off your menstrual period, then it doesn't count. So we have to talk about these things. And once you have clarity for them, you'll know exactly what to do, inshallah. And it'll affect the way you pray and a lot of other ritual functions that you have. You don't need anything here. وَالنِّفَاسُ هُوَ الدَّمُ الْخَارِجُ عَقِبَ الْوِلَادَةِ. And postnatal bleeding is the blood that exists after childbirth. والاستحاضة هو الخارج في غير أيام الحيض والنفاس. And irregular bleeding is blood that exists outside of the days of menstrual and postnatal bleeding. So istihada is actually bleeding. There's bleeding happening somewhere in the female genitalia. Somewhere in the female reproductive system, there's happening bleeding. Outside of what is the normal cycle of what is called the menstrual period, where there's bleeding that's going to happen, it's going to dry up, and then it's going to go back again to that cycle over a number of days. This is all kind of understood for our sisters. You don't have to know all this as a brother in detail, but just at least have some comprehension of it. But when there's bleeding outside of those days, blood that is not dark, that is the blood that has a different color, meaning it's a brighter color, and it's different in amount, and it's not the right time. This is called istihada. This is irregular blood. And for that one, there is no ahkam for that one. I'm going to get that out of the way. There are no rulings for istihada. Irregular bleeding requires you to do nothing. Continue your day normally. You just wash off the blood, just as you would if you bled from your arm. So the woman will treat irregular hayd, or irregular blood, just like we would treat blood if we were bleeding from our arms or from any other part of our body. You wash off the blood, and then you go ahead and you do what you want to do. For the Shafi'iyya, you just have to make wudu for every prayer. If you're going through a time and there's irregular bleeding occurring, so you just make wudu for every prayer and make sure that you wash off any blood that is still there. And if you're wondering, well, how do I know if it's istihada or hayd, if it's irregular or regular menstrual blood? Well, first of all, the characteristics of the blood itself should be helpful, and then what we'll talk about, inshallah, of times in a moment. وَأَقَلُّ الْحَيْضِ يَوْمٌ وَلَيْلَةٌ. And the minimum duration of menstruation is around 24 hours. وَأَكْثَرُهُ 15 يَوْمًا. The maximum duration is 15 days. وَغَالِبُهُ 6 أو 7. And the average duration is 6 or 7 days. Now, these numbers are based on the most up-to-date medical knowledge that they had at the time. This is based on. It's not based on. This is based on medical knowledge. This is what the best understanding of what they have. Now, the 15 days is important because this is one that should be observed. So, 15 days for a menstrual period. After 15 days, a woman should go back to praying, fasting, and doing her thing, even if there's still blood coming out. And if there is, then you should probably get that checked because it's irregular and there's something else going on that needs to be looked at. But for hayd, the shortest is 1 day, and that does occur as well if you speak to your gynecologist. It can be that short. But the longest it can be is 15 days. After 15 days, then you have to go and start praying and going back to your normal life. That's what you can see here. When it comes to the timings, where is the evidence? See, there's no numbers. There are no numbers here because there's no evidence. This is medical understanding. This is what their medical comprehension was at the time. That's why it's important for us to bring medicine into these type of issues and make sure that. That's why I'm pointing out to you that these numbers actually still are valid. 1 in 15 are pretty good, and that's fine. Or did I miss something? No, I'm good. So أقل النفاس لحظة وأكثره 60 يوما وغالبه 40 يوما. And the minimal duration of postnatal bleeding is just a small amount of time, like an hour or so after bleeding, and then it dries up, which is very rare. It does happen, but it's very rare to happen that way, but it can. وأكثره 60 يوما. The maximum is 60 days. So after 60 days, even if there's still blood, then a woman goes back to her normal prayers and fasting, and then you need to be checked. This is important. Yeah, these things are important for medical reasons. And the most average duration is around 40 days. وأقل الطهر بين الحيضتين 15 يوما ولا حد لأكثره. This is very important. This is a good piece of information here. The minimum duration of purity between 2 menstrual periods for a woman is 15 days. That's the minimal amount of time. There's no end to how long it can there's no cap to how long it can go. There's no maximum. I mean, you can not have a menstrual period for a long time. People go through menopause and then they don't have it ever again. But between two menstrual periods, 15 days is the least. So if a lady finishes her menstrual period, and then she starts praying, and on the 13th day, she has a period again, no, you continue. Continue until it's 15 days, and then you can stop again. But at that point, you should go and be checked, because it's abnormal for it to be at 15 day intervals between. Again, a lot of this is medicine. It's not as much fiqh. But the fiqh part is just knowing what is the maximum amount of hayd. The maximum is 15. Anything more than that, pray. Go back to your prayers and get checked, because that's probably something abnormal. The shortest amount of tuhr between two menstrual periods is 15. Anything less than that, just keep on doing your thing for 15 days. So those two numbers are helpful for you. I get this, these are probably the most common question I get regarding menstrual periods, is that I had my period this time, and now 6 days later I'm seeing blood. What do I do? You pray, you continue. It's only been 6 days. You finished. You have 15 days where you're definitely going to be praying. That blood is istihada. It's istihada, so you go ahead, you make wudu for every prayer, you wash the blood off, and you need to get checked and make sure that there's nothing abnormal causing the bleeding, because it shouldn't be happening, right? And everything that is going to be impermissible because of the menstrual period is permissible when you have irregular bleeding, so you can do. So like, for example, tawaf is a big one. Because I get this question the most during Hajj and Hajj times, because people are always saying, what do I do? I saw blood, it's not my time. What do I go make tawaf? Just wash off the blood, make wudu, and go make tawaf, because you're not... this is not your menstrual period. And even if it is, the rules apply. If you just finished 10 days ago and now it's back, then you have 15 days where you're safe to continue to do all of the rituals that you want to do. وأقل زمن تحيض فيه المرأة 9 سنين وأقل الحمل 6 أشهر وأكثره 4 سنين وغالبه 9 أشهر. And the minimum age at which a woman menstruates is 9 lunar years. The maximum minimum, which we don't know. I mean, again, this is all medicine. This is all based on observation at the time. This is what they observed. And yes, this is not abnormal for a young lady to have her menstrual period at 9. In many parts of the world today, that's still very much applicable. Not probably in North America, but in other parts of the world, it does happen, and it can go even less than that. And the minimum duration for pregnancy is 6 months. The maximum is 4 years. The most common duration is 9 months. So this is based on medicine at the time. That obviously, I've never seen anything go for 4 years, but maybe they did. If they did, then that's why they're saying it. They're basing it on whatever knowledge they had at the time. But today, I think if you're being pregnant for 4 years, you probably should see a gynecologist very, very urgently. Allahu alam. But that's here. Again, this is just shows you the value and this is, to me, the most, the part of I like the most about studying Islamic texts, old Islamic texts, is because this is how it's always been. We always go back to the original texts. We study them. There's no haraj in pointing out this may be not applicable anymore, this may be incorrect, he may have not got this right. There's nothing wrong with doing that. This is a very important exercise for us to normalize. Meaning there's nothing wrong with pointing out, saying, yeah, by the way, this specific hukum here, ruling, that is outdated, or it doesn't apply anymore, it didn't apply then, or you didn't get that accurately. It doesn't take away from the value of the knowledge of the scholar, rahmatullah alayhi, who wrote this. It doesn't take away from the value of the text that we have within our hands. That's 800 years old. It doesn't take away from that. It's just, this is how knowledge is built. Knowledge is, you build, it's building bricks. You start and you keep on building upon knowledge. And there's nothing wrong pointing out if there's things that weren't perfect there. That doesn't take away. We don't sanctify or holify the words of anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for what we have that is authentic from his mouth. Everything else is our efforts as human beings, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. And that doesn't mean it's not a problem. Making mistakes is a part of this process. وَيَحْرُمُ بِالْحَيْضِ 8 أشياء. So here's a bit of controversy for you today. Here's our dose of controversy. So 8 things are unlawful because of menstruation and postnatal bleeding. There are things. So everything that is haram with hayd is haram with nifas. Everything that you can't do when you have menstrual period, you can't do when you have postnatal bleeding. It applies equally, exactly the same. So what are the things that we definitely know? As-salatu was-sawm. So praying and fasting, and circumambulating the Kaaba, so tawaf, and intercourse, wal-wata'. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, these are 100% agreed upon among scholars. There's no disagreement on these 4 at all. So a woman during menstrual period, she cannot pray, she cannot fast, she can't go to tawaf, and she cannot have full intercourse with her husband. period. Now, the rest of them, there is a lot of debate inside the madhab and debate outside of the madhab as well. And I get these questions a lot. So when we talk about وَقِرَاءَةُ الْقُرْآنِ وَمَسُّ الْمُصْحَفِ وَحَمْلُهُ, so reciting the Quran, touching and carrying the Quran, and entering the mosque. So this is what the majority of the Shafi'iyya believe. And this is what the majority of the other schools of thought. But within each school of thought, there is a lot of different disagreement regarding this issue as well. Like within each school of jurisprudence, inside of this school, there's a lot of debate amongst it. Imam al-Muzani, who is one of the top scholars within the Shafi'i madhab, so he's one of the people, one of the direct students of Imam Shafi'i. So every madhab, you have the Imam and then you have their direct students. And at the end of this course, I'll give you a tree basically of Imam Shafi'i and the direct students and some of the names that you should know at the end of kind of learning all of this. But Imam Muzani is up there as one of the high top-notch scholars, and he disagrees. He doesn't agree with everything in red here. He actually sees it to be permissible for them to read the Quran, touch the Mus'haf, and enter the mosque and carry the Mus'haf. And the final one, which is seeking lustful enjoyment from the area between the navel and the knees without a barrier. So it's permissible with a barrier, but without a barrier is haram. So during menstrual period between spouses, obviously intercourse is haram, but having sexual contact or skin-on-skin contact outside during that time between the navel and the knee is impermissible. You need a barrier. So you should be wearing clothes, or your spouse should be wearing clothes. And if that's the case, then it's fine. So it's permissible with a barrier. So he's talking here about there not being a barrier, and that's the part that's haram. And that, again, there's almost not full consensus on this one, but there's something close to that. Allahu alam within the madhahib with certain distinctions. But number 3, 4, and 5, and 6. So قراءة القرآن مس المصحف وحمله ودخول المسجد is something that is disagreed upon heavily. And the disagreement isn't just for a lady who's during her menstrual period or in postnatal bleeding, also for the muhdith, so someone who lost their wudu. Right? Someone who lost their wudu. Should they be reading Quran, holding the mushaf, carrying the mushaf, or entering the masjid? So there's a similar disagreement on that. So, because the reason they look at it is it's ritual impurity. If you're ritually impure, then go either purify. If you can't, then wait until you are to do these rituals. And you're not obligated to do them if you can't purify. So it's a philosophical difference of opinion of why they would say this is acceptable or not acceptable. The philosophical difference is that those who say, no, you shouldn't do it, is because they see, because someone who lost their wudu, for example, they can just make it again, so they can get rid of their impurity. But a lady who's in menstrual period, she can't. There's nothing she can do that will remove the impurity. So philosophically, either they look at the menstrual period as being time off, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated the women to have. It's time off. You just don't do any of this stuff. Go focus on something else. Focus on you. And they look at it as an obligation to actually have that time off. And others look at it as no, that's not the case. As long as she can't remove it, then she can't be accountable not to be able to do the acts of worship that are not actually pointed out within the Quran, within the Sahih Sunnah. So it's just a philosophical different way of looking at what ritual impurity means that you cannot remove by making wudu or by doing something conscious. All right. And there's some evidence here. I'm not sure if any of this I need you to look into, but I know I don't think so. ويحرم على الجنوب خمسة أشياء. And 5 things are unlawful for someone in the state of major ritual impurity, janaba. Janaba is, when we talked about this before, is someone who has, for example, had sexual intercourse. So before they have how do you get rid of it? You have to do ghusl, which is the ritual shower, ritual bath, which we talked about before. So before they do that, say they have janaba and they haven't done the ritual ghusl yet, they don't have ghusl. So what do? What is haram for them? So الصلاة والطواف وقراءة القرآن ومس المصحف وحمله واللبث في المسجد. So prayer, reciting the Quran, touching and carrying the Quran, circumambulating the Kaaba and remaining within a masjid. And this is not disagreed upon. This is pretty much agreed upon amongst all, within the madhab and outside of the madhab as well. Why? Because this is something that you can remove. This major impurity, you can remove this one. You can just go, you get a shower, or you tayammum if there's no water at all, and then you can go back and do whatever you want. So this is something that's on you. You should take it. But for example, hayd and nifas, when it comes to menstrual periods and postnatal bleeding, because they can't remove it, there's difference of opinion. Like scholars not all agree with the philosophy of that being fully haram for at least قراءة القرآن مس المصحف وحمله. But when it comes to salah and tawaf, no, this is agreed upon. So that's not debatable. So for the person with major ritual impurity, then these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things cannot happen. So prayer, reciting the Quran, touching and carrying the Quran, circumambulating the Kaaba, and remaining within the masjid. So if you're junub, you shouldn't be sitting in the masjid. You should go, remove that, and then come back in. Again, this last one probably, if there's any debate, it's on this last one here. Yeah.
Can you recite the Quran from memory?
If you're junub, no. Yeah, so if you're junub, you shouldn't be reciting the Quran at all before you go and remove your janaba. Now, what is my opinion on the hayd part? Yes, I should have said that I did. I actually agree with Muzani here very heavily. And I think reciting the Quran, carrying it, holding it, entering the masjid is fine for a lady, whether she's in nifas or in a menstrual period. So I'm much more on Imam Muzani's side for this one. Especially that things have changed quite a bit in terms of that management of these periods. I think back in the day, it's very different. Ladies would bleed, by the way, menstrual period, and there was not a lot done for them. So they get weaker and weaker and tired and more tired. So actually staying home, not doing much is actually within their best interest. But now, we were much more aware of things and we have better ways of dealing with it. Yes, there's a question?
So can you go back to So I know some people think, okay, no, just touching and carrying the Quran, and they don't agree with everything else. Is that okay, or should they pick one? Like either you do all of those things, or you don't do any of them?
No, you can, yes, you can, so out of the 3 here, right, the one that's in red, the ones in red, you mean? Yeah, no, you can basically, well, I would say that you should probably research the issue a little bit more before you kind of stick to one or the other, meaning kind of read a little bit more about what scholars have talked about in terms of detailing that, so you have good understanding of it. And once you do, then you should make a decision on these 3. They don't have to be all the same. You don't have to accept them as a package or refute them as a package, but you should know more about them if you want to make a decision. I would say no, you don't have to have them as a package if that's your question. You can deal with them each individually, but I would agree. I would say you should probably read about it, but there is a lot of difference of opinion here. This is more of an easier ruling. Meaning there's a lot of difference of opinion inside the madhab and outside of it, which makes it an issue of a lot of ease. So you shouldn't have too much trouble actually accessing a lot of different opinions regarding it. Yeah.
In regards to reciting the Quran.
Yeah.
For the woman and the man who's in a state of janaba.
Yeah, that's.
I think even the scholars that say it's impermissible, they make an exception for the adhkar, like Ayatul Kursi and
For junub?
Yeah, for both. They say this is even though.
So for junub, I would have to go back and look at that. For junub, there's not much. There's not much flexibility for someone who's junub in search of even when it comes to, like the Malikiya talks about teaching in some of their texts. If you're a teacher and you don't have time as a teacher. But for anything that is ritual, ta'abbudi, whether it's dhikr or it's anything else, if you're junub, you have to, I don't know the permissibility. You have to quote me, you have to quote something for me in order for me to look into it. Because of the fact that this is something that is because it's major ritual impurity and it's reversible, like it's something that is removable. So any act that is ritually driven, meaning you're doing it for the sake of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you should be in at least a state of minor impurity, if not a state of full purity. That's why when the Malikis talk about teaching, it's a little bit different, because teaching is not necessarily an act of it's not a ritual. It's a job, for example. If you have a job, you're trying to do it. Even there, I don't necessarily agree with the Malikis on that one either. I think if you're junub, then you should probably not do that, because there's evidence to support it. But I'll look into that, inshallah. You can quote me quote to me what who it is who disagreed with the Shafi'is, or even outside of that. Yes. Yeah.
Question: is this something that?
Usually just because for the recording later on who didn't attend, so you can hear the question.
All right. Just wanted to ask, do all the madhahibs agree upon these 5 points?
Yeah, for these 5 points, it's almost unanimous. Yeah.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan.
Yeah.
So how do you explain holding the Quran when someone tells you لا يمسه إلا المطهرون?
Yeah, so again, it's not how I would explain, it's how the different madhab will look at this, will explain it. So again, they look at, this is where interpretation of evidence becomes important. How do you understand that ayah? What is لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, which is a verse in Surah Al-Waqi'ah at the end of it. Only إنه القرآن الكريم, indeed it is a noble book, a noble Quran, only touched by those, or only touched by the purified. المطهرون, those who are purified, right, or extremely purified. So is that referring to the malaika? Is that referring to human beings? What type of purity? Are we talking about ritual purity? or essence of purity, because all mu'mins are in essence pure at all times, regardless of. So again, it's all just about how are we understanding this and what we're basing it on. That's why you have these different schools of jurisprudence. It all comes down to interpreting the evidence and the wordings. And what's important for you to understand is that Islam was designed this way. It was designed to have these different opinions within it. Meaning the wording Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose for a lot of these, does that answer your question in general? Or? Yeah. So a lot of these rulings, He chose words that were open-ended in many essences. I mean there are more than one way to understand them. So that you, as a Muslim, spend some time educating yourself, learning, and then following what makes most sense to you. Not just not just the easiest thing for you, but what makes the most sense to you as well. And that's really and that's what the Shafi'is are trying to do. And all the scholars who tried to, who built this madhab tried to do. And every other madhab are trying to do the same thing, trying to choose what makes the most sense, and then you have to do the same thing as a person who's educating themselves Islamically as well. ويحرم على المحدث. So this is ثلاثة أشياء. There are three things that are unlawful for someone in the state of minor ritual impurity. So someone who just let some gas out, for example. الصلاة والطواف, so prayer and circumambulating the Kaaba, and مس المصحف وحمله. I don't know why this is repeated twice. ومس المصحف وحمله, and touching and holding the Quran. And Imam Muzani disagrees about this as well. And this is a heavily disagreed upon a topic. And if you Google it and look at it, you'll find endless reports of scholars talking about what they think regarding holding the Quran when you don't have wudu. And you can read the Quran, obviously, it's not one of the three things. It's just touching the Quran and carrying it. What do we do there? So what is the bottom line regarding this issue? Now, I look at it from an issue of ta'zeem. I look at it from a little bit. Fiqh over the centuries has been, for whatever reason, just like Aqeedah has been, they removed the practical aspect of it. They removed the aspect of practice from learning who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, which is a problem. We removed ethics and principles from fiqh a little bit when we talk about it. So it becomes very mechanical. We just talk about what you can and cannot do. We don't talk about exactly what the mentality behind these rituals are. So when they're talking about holding the Quran, touching the Quran, reading the Quran, it's out of respect for this piece of revelation that you have. It's held in the highest regards. If you respect it a lot, then you'll make sure that you're not in contact with it unless you are at a high degree of purity. Does that make sense? Like it's issue of ta'zeem, of magnification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and everything that is coming to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you magnify Allah a lot, like very highly in your mind and heart, and you magnify the Quran, then you wouldn't want to touch it in a state or being in a state where you're impure. You'd always want to be fully pure in order for you to access what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. So that's the mentality behind all these ahkam. Others look at it as no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're pure from the time we say La ilaha illallah. These are awarid. I mean, these are variables in our lives. Sometimes you have wudu, sometimes you don't. It's not affecting it. So I always want to be in contact with everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me, no matter what variable state I am in that is earthly in manner. Both arguments make a certain degree of sense, right? Both of them, you can see the light in them. But this is why we have difference of opinions within Islam. It's how you look at things. So you have to determine how you look at things. And then you will follow the scholars who have the same way of looking at things, and you follow their ahkam and rulings as you go along. This is the key or the secret to learning how to actually practice fiqh, is figuring out what the mentality behind a lot of what's being said is said, and then following those who have the similar mentality too in terms of how you view things. Some people look at the Quran as, I want to always be close to it regardless of this. I don't see this as taking down its value or devaluing it by coming to it with impurity. And some others are like, no, I will never even look at it until I'm fully pure. And that just comes to a different degree of magnification, a different understanding of philosophy of how you want to access something. And that's really all this is. And I just want you to continue to observe that as we go along. Fiqh is not an issue of right and wrong. At least not for the majority of cases. Some cases there's consensus. This is something that there's no agreement or disagreement upon. Why? Because the Quran came and said it very clearly, pointed it out. For example, that's why I told you memorize the ayah, Surah Al-Ma'idah number 6, right? Because it talks about wudu. It tells you, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. Wudu has to have hands, face, hair, and feet. No way out. Like it has to have those things. If you made wudu with water, then these four organs must have been covered with water. And then we can talk and disagree upon the other ones based on the evidence and based on understanding of things, right? So that's why it's important to understand fiqh and understand what the spirit of fiqh actually is. So this concludes the Kitab of Tahara. This is the end of the chapter of purification. Yes, go ahead.
I was just wondering, for the points that you have your disagrees on, could you kind of tell us a little bit more? From the different madhabs' point of views?
If I do that, then I'm going to turn this into a completely comparative fiqh review. So I'm trying to limit myself, I'm trying to hold myself back from doing that, because if I start doing that, we'll never, it won't be a course anymore. It'll turn into an ongoing fiqh lesson that'll never end. Because there's always, everything that we talk about will have a lot of difference of opinion. So I'm just as long as there's within the madhab an opposite opinion, then I'm good with that. If the madhab itself, if the school of jurisprudence itself does not have another opinion in it, and I think it's a very relevant issue, I'll point out what the other madhab say just so that you have access to it. But if within the madhab there's a scholar who is mu'tabar, who is someone who is respected and carries weight in the madhab, and his opinion is voiced, then you can just choose that opinion within the madhab, and that's fine, because he's still using the same methodology as other scholars in the school of Shafi'iyya would choose. But if they don't have that, in like the dogs, for example, I will kind of explain everything for you, and then leave it up to you how you want to deal with it as you move along. But does that make sense? So I'm trying to limit myself in terms of how much comparative fiqh I do here, because I want to, inshallah, be able to say at the end of the semester we read half of the matan, and you know how to do the rituals now based on one madhab at least, and you have that access, inshallah. Did you have your hand up, or go ahead? Okay, I'll come to you in a minute. Yalla, go ahead. You have how about you go first, since you have and then we'll give it to sister over there. Go ahead. So I'm finished. The next 10 minutes until Maghrib, or the next bit till Maghrib, will just be Q&A about the chapter of purity, and we can go back to any of the slides within the chapter of purity and review them together if you have any questions. There are 2 assignments attached. They both expire at the end of October. I talked about one last week and one this week, so you have some time to get them done, but those 2, inshallah, are what I'm hoping for you to do and to build on in terms of your knowledge of the chapter of purity. Go ahead.
Okay, when we mentioned about the eight prohibitions of the women.
Yep.
When they mentioned about reciting the Quran, I believe there might be a difference of opinion between like the Shafi'i and all 4 of them, but
Yes.
there's in one of my notes it says that Malik and Ibn Taymiyyah will allow it due to lack of authentic evidence.
Yeah. So I don't know,
and
maybe.
to forbid the recitation.
Yeah, so I pointed out that 1, 2, 3, 4 are heavily debated in general, and Imam Muzani within the Shafi'i madhab is okay with it. But it's heavily debated outside of the madhab anyways, meaning it's not something that is agreed upon in other madhab. And it's the same question the sister asked. I'm not going to go into the comparative fiqh of it. So as long as there's an alternative opinion for something within the school of jurisprudence, I'll point it out, and then you're good to continue to follow that, knowing that the prominent opinion within the Shafi'i madhab is what I put up there, but you have the other opinion. There are many other opinions, a lot of the other madhab have different opinions, but I didn't want to go down that, but you're welcome to do that for
So
your
the
own.
Shafi'i basically restricts, it's one of the 8 restrictions.
Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4 as the prominent opinion within the Shafi'i madhab, this is it here. Imam Muzani within the madhab, within the actual school of jurisprudence of Shafi'iyya, disagrees. And then outside of that, there's a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of disagreement on these 3 points specifically. But then 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 here are pretty much agreed upon amongst all 4 schools of thought, almost unanimously, with the exception of this last one here, because they have a little bit more disagreement on. But the ones up here, no, these are disagreed upon heavily outside of the school of thought of Shafi'iyya. And within the Shafi'i madhab, we have Imam Muzani and a couple of other people. I didn't count them all, because there's no point. As long as one of the heavy scholars of the Shafi'i madhab is disagreeing with something, then you already have 2 opinions within the madhab that you can choose either one of them. It's not a problem, inshallah.
Okay, jazakallah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is that when it comes to touching and carrying the Quran in a state of minor impurity, something that I've commonly heard when it comes to like prohibiting it for women while they are menstruating is that even for those that allow it, they say like don't touch the Arabic text of the Quran.
Yeah, so they go into more detail. So if you want to
my question is, even for this then, when they say like touching and holding the Quran, is if you're reading an English translation of the Quran that has purely English in it and no Arabic.
Yeah. For the Shafi'i, no, the answer is for the Shafi'i. So others, you'd have to go and kind of access all of that. Again, I don't want to go into the comparative aspect of fiqh here, because there's a lot of different opinions outside of the Shafi'iyya, outside of the four madhahib even, outside of the four schools of thought or four schools of jurisprudence. There's a lot of opinions regarding this specifically, because and the reason being is that books were not as available maybe when these mutun were written, like 1,000 years ago. So it wasn't that much of a problem. Today, we always have it. And actually, this question is going to regress. People are going to stop caring about this more and more. Why? Because we all have the Quran on our phones now. And phones don't apply, so people are going to stop asking this question. Just like, so this question peaked in the 90s, is going to continue to peak for a couple more years, then it'll regress again, people will stop caring anymore because it doesn't make a difference. So you can go and you'll find a lot of different explanations, whether you can touch the actual text in Arabic. Again, it's all out of respect. If you're not pure, then maybe you shouldn't be accessing this front. Again, it's a philosophical approach in terms of what you understand magnification to be, what you understand respect of a revelation, a text to be. But yes, that is talked about. Not in the Shafi'i madhab, because Shafi'i madhab says it's impermissible prominently, and then Imam Muzani just disagrees, but he doesn't go into detail regarding this disagreement. The disagreement that you explained exists. Actually, it's not in any of the four madhab. It's all talked about maybe in the last 100 years. Like just recently by scholars, because books became much more widespread. Like you had a Quran in every house, so everyone had their own text of the Quran in their home that they used. So this question became much more prominent and important at a time when this was not the case. This was less cared for in terms of as a question that people would ask, because whatever Quran you knew up here. And you didn't really have access to books very often. And if you did, it would be once a week or something when you went to a masjid or you visited a sheikh who actually owned or had a version of the Quran or like an actual print of the Quran. Otherwise, people just knew what they knew in their heads. And then that's, of course, a different story.
Any authentic website that you can refer to?
For what? For these things? Again, that wouldn't. I would say for the purpose of this course, no, because maybe in a other setting, maybe. But for the purpose of this course, I don't want. The goal of this is for you not for you to go on a long search of every single opinion that exists for every single issue. This is for you to learn the way one school of jurisprudence thought about something. And then kind of just understand their methodology, understand their reasoning and their rationale behind things, which I'll explain to you. In terms of authentic websites, I don't really know. I don't really use a lot of websites, honestly, for this stuff. But I think there's a lot out there. I can maybe look into it, but again, it wouldn't be a part of this course. I don't want you to actually go and study. If you study every single aspect of fiqh that we're studying here, based on the four madhahib, you'll learn almost nothing. You'll just end up with a lot of confusion and lack of clarity. And a lot of students who start out by doing that they don't benefit at all, because they're reading too many opinions on too many issues all at once. It's too much to take in. So what you start by doing, you just learn one madhab. Just learn one way of doing things. Do it the way that you learned it. I'll do my job in pointing out the very relevant and controversial aspects that may affect you, and give you a breakdown, like for example dogs, and we talked a little bit about other aspects throughout the review. I'll point them out for you so you have some idea of it, but then just stick to the madhab, and then learn another one, and then maybe you have two to choose between, and then three, and then four, as much as you learn. Some people just learn one, they'll stick to them, they'll be happy with that, knowing of some exceptions regarding that madhab about issues that are controversial or relevant to them within their daily lives. Because people who are, for example, working with vinegar and khamr, that 3-second or 10-second review I did on that, they'll like that, it's not enough. I need you to explain in more detail. Well, that's your job. You have to go and learn more about this issue if you're going to need more answers and it's going to be more relevant to you on a daily basis. Yes, I saw someone with their hands up. Yeah.
I forgot my question. Oh, okay. So my question was just about the four madhabs in general. Based on what you're saying and what I've heard in the past, what I've always been told is that you have to choose one and stick to it. You can't pick and choose between like one rule from this one and one rule from this one. Do you have an opinion?
Okay, I'll explain it one more time, and then I won't answer this question again, because it's the third time, but I'll answer it one more time. So no, you don't have to stick to a madhab for everything. But in order for you to actually practice Islam, you have to follow the way of thought of someone. You have to choose somebody to teach you, because this is an oral tradition. This is taught one generation to the other, scholars will continue to teach. So who are you going to learn it from? From an individual or from hundreds and thousands of individuals who have the same way of looking at things? That's what a madhab is. The madhab is just basically 100,000 scholars who had a certain way of doing things. You are very, very safe in trusting what they're explaining to you regarding how to do your rituals and what to do in certain situations. So you choose one of these 4 schools of thought that have this merit and this strong background, and you follow that and you start practicing religion. Then you run into issues that the way that it's being done is very inconvenient for you, or is causing you a lot of usr, difficulty, or it's very hard to continue. So at that point you ask the question, are there other opinions regarding this? What are those opinions? What evidence do they have? And then you take some time, because it's a relevant issue, because it's controversial, because it's contemporary, meaning it's affecting you, you take some time to understand and learn. And then if you are convinced that maybe this opinion that you're following within this madhab is not the best opinion, and it's not serving its purpose for you in your life, then you can choose outside of it. But you have to do that. If you don't do that, then that's a problem. If you're basically just going around like, just jumping around from one opinion that's convenient for you to the other, without you spending time to actually learn and understand why, and then following the evidence that makes the most sense to you, not that is the easiest for you, then that is what's haram. It's not choosing the fatwas of different scholars. No, they're all scholars and they had good reason. But your job is, I take the methodology of one body of scholars and I live Islam through their understanding, right? And then when I run into things that are very difficult and controversial and contemporary to me, I take those issues and I go and I research them and I understand them and I learn from others and I look at the evidence and then I choose out of the opinions that are in front of me that which makes the most sense to me. Right? And that's not haram, that's actually your obligation. You should do that. You should not be stuck within the confinements of a madhab if it's causing you a lot of grief. You should look outside. You should ask and you should educate yourself and make sure that you're following something that is agreed upon, that has strong evidence to it, but there's no other options. Now, I think the sister had asked, and I'll add this because this question was asked last week as well, regarding fatwa shopping, or that phrase. That phrase is used for those who aren't interested in the process that I just explained. Meaning they just want someone to tell them that this thing here is fine. They don't care why or who or what the reasoning is. They just want someone to tell them that. And that is a problem, because that means the person who is doing it is not actually interested in pleasing Allah and doing what is right. They just want their ease. So that's not enough. That's not a good enough reason for you to ask the question or to change practice. So really what you should do as a Muslim is choose one madhab, because madhab is a collective intellectual output of hundreds and thousands of scholars over a long period of time. You're going to take that because you can trust it, because there's a lot of people who came up who understood and interpreted things the same way. You follow Islam based on that, and then when you run into things that are very inconvenient and very difficult and very contemporary and relevant to you, then you take a step back and you ask the question, right? If you do it any other way, if you say, well, I'm going to just read the websites, then your madhab is the madhab of the website that you're reading. And that website doesn't have a madhab, then you're basically following the madhab of the one scholar who's writing all that stuff. And I think it's more safe to follow the madhab of 100,000 people than the madhab of one person, right? And then you can always refer to this person's evidence processing and opinions when the issue is contemporary, relevant, and inconvenient or difficult for you. And this is the right way to follow Islam in general. And this is what I want you to learn from this. We're going to learn the Shafi'i madhab. We do not holify it, we don't sanctify it, and we're not here to also point out every mistake and say it was wrong. No, we're just going to learn to do all of this based on one methodology of thought, and then we'll point out the stuff that are relevant to us and difficult and how others have looked at it so that you can have that access if you want to. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is female discharge considered najs?
So كل مائع خرج من السبيلين نجس. Everything that exits the genitalia from both front and behind is najis except sperm. Everything else is najis. Everything. So whether it's urine, blood, or feces is najis. So the discharge from a female is one of those 3 things. Right? It's one of those 3 things. It's either blood or feces or urine, or infection, which is definitely najis. Otherwise, there's nothing else that actually comes out, at least medically, as far as I can tell. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe 1/3 of women.
Yeah.
And
Usually, yeah.
Like,
So say
do
that
you-
again.
like that's continuous, you make wudu like 100 times, like what do you do?
No, so you just make wudu. So if you have, and this is istihada. So the continuous vaginal discharge is going to be looked at as istihada, as irregular discharge, right? So menstrual period, that is the blood that comes out during menstruation, and then you have postnatal, and then you have istihada. Any irregular discharge that's happening outside of the time of postnatal bleeding or menstrual period, and that there you don't follow any of the ahkam of someone who has a major ritual impurity or is menstruating or has postnatal bleeding or any of that. You just make wudu for each prayer and remove to the best of your ability whatever najasa you still have on. So if that's not possible, then you still make wudu and pray, and even if there's still najasa there, that's fine. Some people have, for example, ostomy bags or urostomy bags where there's always a pouch that has feces or urine in it. And then they can empty it, make wudu and pray. In the middle of the prayer, there'll be urine there. And that urine is probably touching their skin or the feces, and that's fine because they have no other way to do this, so they are fine. I mean, they're not held accountable for that, and all they have to do is empty, make wudu, and then pray, and whatever comes out, ma'fu anhu. This is forgiven and excused. And once you guys go through that full document and everyone takes one and translate it, I'll add to it some of the more modern excusable filths that exist, and one of them is those who have incontinence, for example.
Incontinence, yeah.
Any form of incontinence, all that is ma'fu anhu. So you do your best to clean, you make wudu and you pray. But he's like, well, I didn't go to the bathroom today, but you have incontinence, so that you have to make wudu for every prayer because that. And again, if there's a reason not to, this is all of these have exceptions too. So if someone's ill, and the more ill they are and the more difficult it is for them to do things, there are more exceptions that are made for them. But we try and bring them as close as possible towards staying pure when they perform their prayers. Did you have one more? Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a very specific question. So if a girl gets a wet dream and there's no wetness when she wakes up, does she still have
A huge difference of opinion there because it depends on what book of fiqh and when it was written, because again, this is a medical issue. They used to believe that wet dreams for women were similar for men, meaning there was going to be discharge, which is something medically that is untrue. So since that's untrue, I actually side on yes. So if there was any form of euphoria that occurred during a dream, then regardless for men and women, whether there's discharge or not, then they should have perform a full ritual shower or a ghusl right after this. Go ahead, and then I'll go to Sissy. Go ahead.
So there's a contemporary issue about alcohol,
Yeah.
that it's used in certain drinks or food.
Yeah.
And they say that once it's added to that thing that you're cooking,
Yeah.
that it no longer, for example, like has the intoxicating effect.
Like what?
But we mentioned, like for example, like I don't know, like some macaroni they make at restaurants. They use they use actual like rum.
So we have to differentiate between alcohol as a chemical compound and
they use actual
wine.
khamr. So they use like a bottle of rum, for example. They add some of it to the
So that wouldn't
cooking.
be acceptable.
So that's what I'm saying. According to the madhab, they say it's najis.
Yeah.
So
Not
you
just the
wouldn't be-
madhab. This is almost unanimous. So khamr, if you're actually adding wine, drinkable khamr,
Yes.
drinkable intoxicating wine or alcohol, drinkable intoxicating alcohol, adding it to food or adding it will definitely is a problem.
So that's because it's najis. Not because
both.
of the intoxication.
No,
because there is no intoxicating effect.
Yeah, there's no intoxicating after you processed it. But
Exactly.
It actually has intoxicating features to it when you added it. So that on its own is enough to make it haram. Now, if you're going to there are some scholars who say if by processing it loses that intoxicating feature, then you're stuck with the fact that it's najis. So either it's like it's a two-layer haram. So it's very difficult to argue this. Yeah.
There are scholars who say it's not najis.
But they don't carry a prominent opinion in any of the madhab. So you're talking about those who kind of take it, which is fine, which is not a problem. They take a side opinion, that's okay. But then you're stuck with the fact that you're adding you're adding something. So you're adding a substance that is haram to food, right? You're adding so when you take the wine, that's haram. So adding it and saying, well, it's not having a haram effect anymore, doesn't really change the fact that you actually took something haram and added it to your food. So that
Isn't that like when you're turning it into like vinegar, for example?
So you'd have to turn it into vinegar before you added it to the food. Right? So if you turn it into vinegar, then you can take the opinion of the Malikis and the Hanafis who say if you turn it into vinegar and then add it, that's fine, then I'm okay with that. But if you add it as wine, as a substance that is haram on its own essence.
So that food in itself, you won't be able to eat it.
Yeah, you shouldn't be eating
it.
Yeah, to the majority of scholars, that shouldn't be eaten. But on the other hand, adding alcohol which is a substance, a chemical substance that is not drinkable, right? No, it's not. So alcohol, like for example, I have alcohol in my practice all the time. I can't. If I drink it, I die. Basically, you can't drink it. It's not something drinkable, and you're adding it to people's wounds all the time. And it's not najis because it's not drinkable alcohol. It's not intoxicating in terms of being a recreational drink. So they use substances and add to vanilla sometimes, and maybe add to other foods and but that's fine. It's not a problem. It's what the brother here just pointed out, which is where you see the chef and they pour the red wine on it and they continue. No, that's Islamically for the majority of scholars problematic, and I agree because because what he's holding in his hand there. That shouldn't be anywhere near anything that you're eating as a Muslim, regardless of what it turns into afterwards or what it is before that, right? So I think, but again, you may find an opinion that says otherwise, but we would have to really break that down and look at the evidence that supports it, because I find the argument will be quite weak in general. There's just too many layers here that they're ignoring. Go ahead.
So sorry, on that point, like when we're at a restaurant, should we be asking them or should we?
No, not necessarily. Look at the menu. If the menu doesn't say, some of the menus will, especially go to the Italian places, the good pastas, unfortunately, they all have some amount of wine being added to them.
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't say, you don't have to ask. You're not obligated to go into the kitchen and sniff out what they're using and doing. It's not your job. But if they say that they're adding wine, then you shouldn't order it. Or, which is what I do, I ask, can this be done without wine? Because I've never had a fucicino or whatever they call them, Alfredo something. I don't know what it is. Like, can it be done without wine? And they'll tell you either yes or no, right? And that we can do this without wine, or we have to do it with wine. There's no other way. Or the wine is already a part of the sauce or whatever. So if they can, then that's fine. But if not, you're not obligated to search. Like, you're not obligated to go really deep into every aspect of eating when you're within the country that you are. If this is where you are. If you're outside of here, if you're traveling, then you should look into it a little bit more because you don't know. But if you're here, you just ask whatever is what the normal questions would be.
Yeah.
One more.
And sorry, one of the sisters is asking,
That's okay.
after the istihala, does she have to make ghusl?
No, she does not have to make ghusl. It's sunnah to make ghusl. It is sunnah to make ghusl once the istihada is over, but it's not obligatory. So istihada is basically, it's just like if you were bleeding from your arm. The same thing. If I had a cut on my arm and every day I find some blood and I clean it up, it's the same thing. It's no difference. Istihada, irregular discharge, is similar to having a cut with blood or pus or whatever coming out of it. You treat it the same way. So you don't have to change anything, and you don't have to stop doing any of the rituals, but you do have to look into see why. I think that's the most important. I think Islamically that's the piece that was left out, because back in the day they didn't have access to good healthcare where you can go and learn something, figure out what's going on. But here, if you have irregular, you should probably go see what the reasoning is, because you're bleeding outside of the cycle. There's probably some reason for it, just so that you're safe. But Islamically, no, you don't have to ghusl, and you can continue to practice your rituals normally. You just make wudu for every prayer, and you cleanse yourself from the blood and or the pus or the discharge or whatever it is that's coming out to the best of your ability within reason. Again, all of these ahkam that I talk about with you are within reason. Now, within reason, what is reasonable? You're not required to do. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. You're not required. That's why once we're done doing fiqh, what I will move forward to, so we'll do inshallah the four madhab, each one as preliminary text, but I will start usul al-fiqh. I'll do because that's where you actually learn the philosophy of how people have thought. Like, you want to understand, I'm not going to go through a lot of it now, but if you want to know why it is the Shafi'iyya even thought about these things, you have to figure out how they process evidence, what philosophy they had about a lot of the rituals or rulings in general. And that is where it's like the programming behind it's actually the code. So that's what usul al-fiqh is. So we'll try and do that inshallah the next semester. I'll start the first part for that as well, for those who are interested. But I mean, in general,
okay, and then
you'll pick up a lot of these things as we go along. Yeah.
One last question about vaginal discharge. So if a sister wakes up with vaginal discharge without a wet dream, does she have to do ghusl?
Yeah, so as I said, wet dreams in general, meaning dreams that have euphoria in them, for male and female, whether there is discharge or not, Wallahu a'lam, the best thing is for them to do ghusl. Because again, they based a lot of these rulings based on the best medical information available. So they looked at it as in female, that they thought that there was always going to be discharge. So if there wasn't, they didn't apply to it the ruling. And for males, the same thing. And now we know that no, both males and females can ejaculate and have an orgasm without actually having any form of discharge. So if you remember having a dream that has something like that in it, then you should make ghusl regardless of whether you find something in your in your underwear or not. Now, the issue becomes if you are uncertain. You're uncertain, which is where really this question becomes. If you're uncertain, I'm not sure what happened. I can't remember then you look at your underwear, and then based on whether there's discharge or not, you either have a ghusl or not, for both men and women.
Okay, but like, let's say someone has like vaginal discharge all the time,
Yeah.
and then they wake up every day and they have to make ghusl every single morning?
No, unless they thought that they had a wet dream.
Okay.
Like if they like I slept like a baby, I don't remember anything at all, then no, they don't have to have ghusl. It's just like if they wake up, I think I did, I think I didn't. If they see something, and then they should make ghusl afterwards. Wallahu a'lam. And of course, there's a lot of medical nuances and exceptions and rare stuff that happen, which I don't want to discuss here, but people who have these rare instances, that's why I'm saying, you learn a madhab, and then something in your life brings out a hukum to be very difficult for you. That's when you go and you start asking, and you figure things out, and you look at evidence, and you research, and you take an opinion that makes sense to you, and that also makes your life more livable. But that's how, because everyone here has to know the ahkam for every issue of fiqh. This is not for you to become a mufti. This is for you to practice Islam. So ask me the questions, I'm going to help you practice Islam, not to actually give fatwa. Please don't give fatwa based on one preliminary fiqh text that you study. This is, to give fatwa, this requires like maybe 10 years of study, where you go through a preliminary text in all four madhahib, and then a secondary text in all madhahib, and you study usul fiqh, you really understand the reasoning and the evidence behind stuff, and you have the ability to process this evidence on your own, interpret it, and then you've studied the nuances. Before that, you just take this for your own practice, inshallah. I think there was someone here first. No? Yes, go ahead. No, formula, no. It has to be breastfed by the mother. Yeah, it's purely breastfeeding by the mother. Formula does not count.
Are you familiar with Ahl al-Hadith?
Yes.
People who, they just take hadith and they follow it. Do they have any madhab? Like, do they follow a madhab?
So the word hadith is very.
Follow hadith?
No, that's a very that's a blanket word. So it covers a lot of different groups and a lot of different. So it's not.
Okay, I'll define it. Ahl al-Hadith is the one who follow Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah, but everyone follows Quran and Sunnah.
Into the madhabs.
Yeah, but all the madhahib, they follow Quran and Sunnah. That's why they're a madhab. They're a madhab because that's all they follow, Quran and Sunnah. So the word Ahl hadith is a blanket term that doesn't really mean much, because unless you have to be very specific in terms of who we're referring to here. But all of the madhahib here, they quote their source of evidence is Quran and Sunnah. And there's really nothing, and the rest of their sources of evidence are deferred upon. Every madhab has a different way of looking at things, and there's really no other way to follow the deen. So Ahl Hadith are just, this term actually is meaningless. Like I don't mean that to mean, it's a term that doesn't have much meaning to it, because I don't know who you're referring to. This is a word that was used early in Islamic history, and then it was used again in mid-Islamic history, and then it was used again recently in Islamic history, and it was used by different groups to describe other groups, and sometimes two groups are describing themselves each as that. So it's not a term that has very good definition to it. Wallahu a'lam. So I don't think it's
because each scholar has said, like Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and other, they have said, if you find a hadith against my qawl.
So not all of them said that, and even that quote again, that's the Shafi'i's quote. Shafi'i said that. That's understood within his context. In the context of what he meant by that. Because again, that's why studying hadith is a science. Hadith is not enough for it to be authentic in terms of its chain of narration. It has to be authentic in terms of the linguistics and the meaning. There are a lot of conditions that they apply to how they accept the hadith, and how they run by it, and how they go by it, and how they interpret it and understand it. And so there's a lot of details here. It's not as clear and cut. I think, unfortunately, again, I don't want to get into this because it's outside of the scope of what this course is trying to teach. But there are literal ways of understanding things, there are figurative ways, there's something in between, there's context that needs to be taken in consideration to everything that is being taught. So that's where maybe there's differences between groups in terms of how they look at things. And unfortunately, the word hadith is just not a term that has enough definition to it where I can address it respectfully and appropriately. It'll just turn into maybe a bad description or a positive or negative description that may not be helpful for those who are listening to it. Wallahu alam. More definition is probably required. There's one more question. I thought there was one more person. Yes, go ahead. The last one.
Yeah, last one. This is about dogs.
Yeah.
About having them as pets. So we mentioned that the difference of opinion between the madhahib on their purity, and we mentioned that some saw them as pure, some as non-pure, and some only saw their saliva as impure. But in terms of having them as pets, there's a hadith mentioning that if you have a dog for other than certain reasons, like for shepherding or for hunting.
So it comes down to the same thing. So here's the problem. So the Malikis have an understanding of that hadith. It's not that hadith was not clear to them. It was there. But their interpretation of it is different than the interpretation of the four madhahib have towards it. That makes sense. There's different ways to understand that wording that you're going to give me from the hadith. ذهب من عمله قيراطان, for example, you lose. So they say, well, that doesn't mean it's haram. That just means that you're losing hasanat for doing it. And the probable reason for losing hasanat is that you're scaring people. That's the interpretation of Ibn Abdul Barr, for example, in Tamheed. So really, what you end up learning from madhahib is that there's more than one way to interpret the text that I've read and or has been recited upon me by Fulan or Allan, right? And so the Malikis have a specific way of interpreting all of the hadith regarding dogs specifically, which led them to their general way of dealing with them. So in order for you to actually say, I want to take a dog a pet, you can't go by what I talked to you about today. No, you have to go and you have to actually study all of that and take time to actually comprehend their background, the interpretation of the evidence and how they looked at it. And if it makes sense to you, then you can go ahead and do it. And if it doesn't make sense, you're like, well, I like the ruling, but I don't see the sense in it, then you shouldn't do it as well. But again, I don't want to go into every example, but what you need to know is that the Malikiyya knew about that hadith, and they ta'awwaluhu, meaning they have an interpretation of it, they have an explanation of it. You may not agree with that explanation, that's fine, but they do have an explanation of it. Does that make sense? And this is why it's important to understand madhahib, because they looked at evidence and they had ways of going by it. And sometimes they would look at a hadith and say, because of a certain reason, we're not accepting this hadith regarding this issue. And that becomes back to their methodology of thought and how they process and interpret evidence. This is law. This is like going to a law course, a course where you're learning law. It's how to interpret and deal with evidence. So I'll end with that, inshallah. We'll see you guys, inshallah, next week. There's a good possibility that, not next week. Next week we're still at 6 o'clock, but after that we change the time a little bit, make it a little bit later in the day so that I can make it from work because I'm getting here barely on time. And I think some of you who are working may find it difficult at 6. But we'll talk about that, inshallah, next week. Next week is 6 o'clock. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullahu khairan. Barakallahu fikum.
You can make it.